Well, in news just coming in a massive mid-air scare in Air India Chicago to Delhi flight made an emergency landing at Toronto airport. There were over 300 passengers, including Minister of State for Aviation GM Siddeshwara on board. The pilot decided to opt for an emergency landing after the engine developed a crack and there was an apparent oil leak. Headlines Today has accessed exclusive images of the mid-air oil dump by the flight following the oil leak. There was an engine failure also reported in the Boeing 777-300ER plane. The Chicago-Delhi flight was diverted to Toronto for an emergency landing. Pankaj Upadhyay, my colleague, joining me over the telephone line. Pankaj, we have these exclusive pictures showing what exactly went wrong with this Air India flight. It's a matter of great concern.
Through our sources is that there was a crack in the engine and there was an oil leak as well mid-air. Now this is a serious issue. Engineers tell us that this was nothing but a miracle, that even after the crack in the engine and oil leakage, that the pilots were successful in landing the plane at Toronto. Now we are getting you the exclusive visuals of the mid-air dumping of the fuel. At the time of takeoff from Chicago, the fuel tank was absolutely full because it was a 16-hour flight, and realizing 2 hours into the flight an emergency landing had to be made. The pilot was left with no option but to dump the tons and tons of fuel mid-air. Now these are exclusive visuals that we are getting for the viewers. Minister of State along with his wife were on board, and what we are also learning, this is another aspect, serious aspect, that crew complement was also not well defined. In this Boeing 777-300ER where there are 10 doors, we are learning that there were only 12 crew members on it. Considering the fact, even if 5 crew members had gone for rest period, which is mandatory, and at the time of landing emergency doors had to be opened, then all the doors would not have been manned. Crew members tell that DGC was well aware of this fact, but it did not take enough measures for this. Now these visuals clearly show what sort of a serious situation was there in the skies with Minister of State on board.
Absolutely, those are very dramatic visuals. Pankaj, do stay on the line with me. Aviation expert Harshvardhan joining me right now. Thanks so much for speaking to Headlines Today. Now I don't know if you've seen these pictures that we're showing right now, but these are really dramatic. A mid-air scare, really a fault with the engine, oil leak as well. In spite of all these problems, Air India flight, it's a matter of great concern. What precautions, first of all, give us your first reaction.
You see, anytime there is a problem in flight, and particularly when the aircraft is en route, it carries fuel, and if the aircraft is on a long-haul flight, it carries a lot of fuel. If there is any engine problem or if pilot feels situation warrants the landing the aircraft, the first thing we do is to reduce the fuel on the damaged side of the aircraft.
Okay.
So particularly in order to avoid, one, we want to reduce the weight of the aircraft. Secondly, fuel, as you know, is the most inflammable item.
Absolutely.
If there is a surplus fuel in the engine, if when it lands on one engine, and in an emergency situation it requires longer runway, and sometimes it has a ground impact which can result into kind of engine catching fire. So if
right, and the whole plane could have blown up really, isn't it?
That's right. So, it is, we do a lot of safety precautions. Sometimes it is landed on a foam where anti-inflammatory properties are there. So, this kind of situation is not unusual, but what we are doing is, this is a laid down emergency procedure where the defueling has to be done. And
no, but sir, are you saying that this sort of fuel leakage is nothing unusual?
No, you see, it is any kind of this kind of in-flight problem is the most unusual situation. You don't plan for it. But you have to realize that if such a situation takes place, there is a laid down procedure which has to be followed to make the landing of the aircraft. Because if a situation like this has happened, what is most important is to save the aircraft and the life of passengers on board. So the first step has to be to land the aircraft to the nearest airfield, which is equipped with these facilities where such aircraft can land. And even at the aerodrome, special precautionary measures are taken.
Right.
The runways are kept clear. The other aircrafts are put on hold because this is a very unusual and emergency.
And sir, is this grounds enough for perhaps an inquiry into this? Perhaps, is it ground enough for the DGCA perhaps to step in?
Well, it is a major incident and it would involve a major investigation. It is not a routine incident. It is a very major incident. Any in-flight shutdown or any flight landing, particularly when it forces you to do emergency landing under procedure, is a major event and it has to be duly investigated.
And sir, a reporter who's got us these exclusive pictures and who's covering this event, Pankaj, he tells us there were only 12 crew members on board this big Boeing 777 airliner. Now that is a number which is far less than the numbers that is required to be on such a big flight, with 10 exit doors itself in the flight. So, what do you have to say about this number, these less crew members who are present on this Air India flight? Something perhaps clearly not right with Air India. Air India needs to look into its functioning first, it seems.
No, you see, number of crew is defined by the emergency doors and also by the kind of service standard the airline follows. An airlines like Air India cannot fly with lesser crew complement than what is defined under the emergency procedures and DGCA guidelines. So I will not accept that there was a lesser crew complement than what should have been as per the laid down guidelines. And if that is the case, if it turns out that they actually were flying with lesser crew than the complement defined under their safety and emergency procedure, then I think Air India has to, there has to be severe penalty on Air India, because it is not only flying on Indian DGCA direction, it was flying in USA under FAA guidelines. But I would not think that such a situation would exist. But if you are making this point, I think it is worth investigating.
Okay, Mr. Harshvardhan, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your views on this big breaking news that we are getting you, those exclusive visuals. Pankaj Upadhyay, you just heard, this is a serious problem here. The plane could have gone up in flames for all you know.
Absolutely. And let me just add to what Harshvardhan sir said right now. It was last year that the Air India Crew Association had written a letter to the Australian authorities saying how Air India was not playing by the rules and this could prove disastrous. What happened after that? The Federal Aviation Administration downgraded our safety rankings. But then Air India has not learned its lesson. Today, it so happens that the Minister of State is on board and you would have got a first-hand picture of where the irregularities are taking place. Now, this is such a serious scenario. A crack in the engine, or one of the engines of the plane, and mid-air oil leakage. Somewhere something has gone wrong. The engineering department will have to come out with a report. Once the plane lands in Delhi and the pilot along with the engineering department submits its report and the DGC also comes out with report, we'll have a clear idea as to what would have happened. The crew as of now tells headlines today that they find that this was nothing sort of a miracle that the pilots were able to land the plane safely at Toronto. As these visuals point out, as we show, tons and tons of fuel was there on board, and 2 hours into the flight the pilots realized it would have to make an emergency landing. After that, all this fuel, this extra fuel had to be dumped mid-air because with so much of fuel, emergency landing was absolutely impossible. Imagine a scenario if the situation had increased with this kind of oil in the fuel tank. It would have been absolutely disastrous for Air India.
Absolutely. It's a very, very close shave, and one can only imagine what would have happened had things gone wrong further. But of course, a detailed inquiry will only help us ascertain more facts into this. Pankaj Upadhyay, thanks so much for getting us inputs on that breaking news and those exclusive visuals.